what I'm going to show you is that these various parameters, the fine-tuning, the design logic, intermingles and acts as a symphonic harmony, an orchestra, where everything works together to allow us not just to live, but to create computers, to create space shuttles. So I'll show you how they all fit together. Thank you. So this is part 3 in the series, where you've learned about the beautiful design of our planet for life and for scientific investigation. What I'll talk about is how our planet is also designed for technological development and cultural advancement. And what I'll talk about is three major topics. One is what I would describe as the convergence of design parameters, because often people talk about design independently. It's either the design of the laws of nature, or the design of our planet, or the design of life, but I'll show that they all work together in harmony. The second topic will be ecology, geology, and technology. And that's the fact that we have technology depends on very complex interactions between ecological cycles and geological cycles. And finally, I'll talk about biomedics. And that's basically when engineers look to life to copy the design in biology to use for our own purposes. Those are the 3 topics we're going to discuss. So in terms of the fine-tuning of the laws of nature, many of you have read Jay Richards and Guillermo Gonzalez or other people that talk about this, and you've learned how if you imagine a device that controlled our universe, and that device controlled everything from the force of gravity to the mass of an electron to the amount of disorder in our universe, if those dials and parameters were not perfectly set, our universe would not support life. So I assume most of you are familiar with the fine-tuning and the laws of nature. And pretty much all of you are aware that life shows evidence of design. These arguments for design go all the way back to about 500 BC, when you had the debates between people like Aristotle and Plato versus Democritus. They were carried on by the Apostle Paul when he talked about in the Epistle to the Romans, you see evidence of God's invisible qualities, his power and nature. And of course, people like William Paley and all the way up to today. And you're familiar with those arguments. And you've learned more today about the arguments about design in our planet, our sun, our moon, and our solar system. But what I'm going to show you is that these various parameters, the fine-tuning, the design logic, intermingles and acts as a symphonic harmony, an orchestra, where everything works together to allow us not just to live, but to create computers, to create space shuttles. So I'll show you how they all fit together. And in this first section, I'll talk about 3 examples. One is with the human body, the second is with fire, and the third is with vision. So there's many examples I could give, but this is just sort of a small sampling of what that looks like. So first of all, it's important to realize, if you talk about technology, it doesn't matter how wonderfully our planet's designed for creating computers or space shuttles if you don't have hands. I don't care how smart Flipper is, he's not going to create a computer. But to have technology, you need individuals that have upright posture so that we can use our hands. You need individuals with highly dexterous hands that can act with great precision and opposable thumbs so that we can grasp things. What happens is no matter how smart you have with the chimpanzee, it can't create technology because its hands don't have the precision that ours do. You need to have language, because if you can't communicate, you can't transfer the technology from one generation to the other. And many of us take language for granted, but the reason that we can hear words and speak them is because of incredibly complex neural wiring between our hearing centers and our vocal cords. Chimpanzees can't do that. Interestingly enough, parrots can. And interestingly enough, the wiring of a parrot's brain is very, very similar to the wiring of the human brain. And that's significant because what it tells us is that vocalization requires highly specific neural wiring to do it right. It's not the sort of thing that could happen by chance. In addition, we have incredibly complex facial features that allow for complex relational connections that can create complex societies which can then preserve and advance technologies. We could talk about our higher reasoning, that we can do things like mathematics. We can do things like writing and reading because of highly specialized structures in our brain. So there's multiple features about the human body that allows us uniquely to advance technologically. So as you hear about this incredible design of our planet and the laws of nature for technology, realize that that was designed specifically for us. That's really significant, how humans are the teleological center of our universe. Now, let's get to the first example, and that's the issue of fire. Because you've heard about in the past how our atmosphere is perfectly designed for life because we have just the right amount of oxygen. If we had too little oxygen, we wouldn't have enough fuel for our bodies to be able to be very active for very long. We'd have to sleep 20 hours a day. Also, if there were too much oxygen, what would happen is our bodies would decompose like an apple would in the air. Do you ever see like an apple core, how it becomes brown because the oxygen breaks apart the cellular structures? That's what would happen to us very quickly if we had too much oxygen in our atmosphere. But it just so happens that the perfect amount of oxygen for us to live is also the perfect amount for fire. Because if you had too little oxygen, you couldn't produce fire in significant quantities. Without fire, you can't melt metals and produce tools to advance technologically. We would always be in the Stone Age. That's really key. Or if you had too much oxygen, we would burn down all our forests. Some of you might be familiar with this if you come from California. In addition, what happens is we have just the right amount of nitrogen that allows for the suppression of fire. So it's like a fire retardant, so it doesn't burn too much. Again, it's perfect for technological development. Interestingly enough also, you wouldn't have significant fire if the electromagnetic force wasn't finely tuned, because if it was too strong, then you wouldn't release enough energy from burning wood or other materials to produce fire. And if it was weaker, we'd have other problems. So there's this convergence of fine-tuning of the laws of nature, of our atmosphere for fire. And it just so happens that our arms are the perfect length to access fire. If we had arms like a Tyrannosaurus Rex, it would be very difficult to roast marshmallows. You could imagine that. Now, the next example is vision. And this is one of my favorite examples, because it just so happens that our atmosphere allows just the right energy through, namely heat and light, for us to live. Because light produces photosynthesis, it allows us to produce oxygen with our plants, and the heat keeps us warm. Also, water happens to allow the right energy through also. The sun just happens to produce the right energy also. So there's this convergence of features from our sun, our atmosphere, and water that allow for the right energy to go to our planet and our oceans, but it blocks out the wrong energy. But in addition to that, what happens is the wavelength of light is perfect for the optics of the eye. Because if the wavelength of light was much longer, then you'd have to have an eye the size of a football field to focus light with the level of resolution we have for our eyes today. And it just so happens that the size of the human eye is absolutely optimal for the wavelength of light to produce a high-resolution image right where our retina happens to be. Interestingly enough, if you look at our retina, which is where our photodetectors are, or photocells, what happens is they have to be a certain size, because you have to have enough molecules in these photodetectors to be able to absorb the light. So you can only make the resolution of your retina so large, and it's very high resolution, better than most cameras. And it just so happens the highest resolution possible based on the chemistry is the same resolution possible based on the wavelength of light. So what you see is this convergence of fine-tuning from the laws of physics to our atmosphere, to our biology, to our chemistry, to allow us to have high-resolution vision, which is essential for technological development. Now let's go to our second point. The second topic is ecology, geology, and technology. And I'm going to give you 3 examples. I'm going to talk about agriculture, I'm going to talk about mineralization, and I'm going to talk about the general progress of technological and scientific development. Now let's agriculture. You might think of agriculture as something that's not exactly the same as technology, but it really is. Because if we weren't able to produce agriculture, if we weren't able to grow high amounts of food in a small amount of space, our population could never have expanded significantly. The fact that we have billions of people on our planet is because of agriculture. And remarkably, what you find is our ecosystem is ideally designed to advance agriculture. Because a lot of people talk about, in beautiful ways, the evidence of design in the bacterial flagellum, this little molecular machine, or in the eye, or in our spinal column. But what's beautiful is the design in how different organisms interrelate with each other. Because entire ecosystems were designed to act in symphonic harmony. And I believe this will be one of the great frontiers of the intelligent design movement, is how there's design behind ecology. And what's interesting is if you look at the amazing achievements that our scientists have done in terms of looking at the design of our planet, the design of molecular machines, looking at information, I believe we're just getting warmed up. Because we've created a foundation for a design-based view of biology, and now we're starting to gain traction to show how intelligent design is the only game in town. If you want to understand biology and ecosystems, you must look at it from the perspective of an engineer, or you're essentially the blind leading the blind. But let's talk about what happens in the soil, which is amazing. Because what you find is you've got earthworms that till the soil. The earthworms will actually even go in different heights of the soil or different depths to take materials to different regions to keep a balanced ecosystem. You've got bacteria just sitting there, and what happens is the plant roots will send a chemical signal saying, guys, need your help. The bacteria wake up, they go to the roots. The roots then change their morphology to allow the bacteria in, create nice little houses for them called nodules. Then the bacteria alter their morphology to work in symphonic harmony with the plants so that the plants give the bacteria nutrients, and the nutrients in the bacteria help to fix nitrogen in things like peanuts and legumes. So you have also this amazing, what we could call the wood-wide network, is what people describe it. It's you've got fungi will create these mycelial networks, and it's like the internet, because these little filaments will go between different plants, and what happens is, let's say you have a plant, and the plant is attacked by some sort of caterpillar or some sort of predator. The plant will send a signal through the network to other plants and warn them that there are pests coming so that they can prepare. So this network acts like an internet where it sends signals and communication to the different plants. And some speculate, they think it might also even send nutrients. So it's possible if you've got a tree, it's dying, it knows there's other trees out there, it can send nutrients and carbon to the other trees to help them survive. So what you find is the reason we can do agriculture is the extraordinary design of our ecosystem to allow it. In fact, what's amazing is you might think reasonably that agriculture would be very problematic, because if we keep taking one plant out, we're disrupting the cycle of nutrients. Because ecology is designed that what it takes out, it puts back in. But what happens, there just so happens to be plants that put back in what some plants take out. So during the 1800s in the United States, there was a crisis because people were farming cotton, and the cotton was taking certain nutrients out of the soil, and the soils were becoming infertile. But a brilliant scientist named William Carver, he said, and it was a really funny story about him because he was the person who said, God, I want you to share the secrets of the universe to me. And he feels that God said, I won't do that, but I'll share you the secrets of the peanut. And what happened was he realized that if you take these legumes like peanuts and you crop rotate, these peanuts and soybeans and other legumes would put the nutrients back in, and he replenished the soil and saved the economy. From this recognition that God designed our planet to help us to advance in culture and technology. Beautiful examples. Well, the second example I talked about is more of mineralization. Because what happens is when you look at the complex ecologies of our planet, they interconnect harmoniously to the complex cycles of geology and our weathering cycle. And what happens is you have these different cycles operating to ensure that everything stays in balance. So if you take carbon dioxide out, you put carbon dioxide back in. You take oxygen out, you put it back in. You take nitrogen out, as I talked about, you put it back in. That's actually a really fascinating story because there happens to be this particular bacteria that has these very sophisticated organelles that use what some would describe almost like rocket fuel to go through a very complex reaction to put the nitrogen back into our atmosphere. Because if something was not in balance, our entire ecology would collapse. But it's not just that. What's amazing is we don't just see these remarkable ecological, geological interfaces for life, but for technology. And Guillermo alluded to this. Because what happens is if you look at plate tectonics, if you look at the water cycle, if you look at the extraordinary properties of water that Michael Denton talks about, if you look at other geological features of our planet, they all work together to ensure that minerals and important metals super concentrate at the surface of our planet. If you go to Jupiter, well, that would be really hard. But if you go to Mars or Venus, you're not going to find beautiful deposits of gold or copper waiting for you to advance technologically because they're all mixed up. But the unique features of our planet allow for the super concentration of these materials for our benefit near the surface. But it's even better than that. Because what happens is you have things like bacterial mats and microorganisms, which then take what's there and super concentrate it even more. So if you didn't have these biological communities concentrating minerals and metals, we wouldn't have access to things like uranium or iron or copper or silver or gold. Beyond that, these organic systems produce half of the minerals we see today. So half of the complex minerals we have access to is because they're manufactured by organisms. And we use them already for things like nanostructures, medicine, advanced sensors, construction. But I argue and believe, as I'm sure my colleagues would argue, that as we advance technologically, we'll find that they're there waiting for us to solve new problems. Well, and the last part of this section is talking about how we're able to advance scientifically. Because it's really remarkable that with fire and stone, we were able to advance a little bit technologically, but then that step allowed us to go to the next step where we could exploit not just like general mechanics, like forces and motion, but we could exploit electromagnetism. We could understand that area of physics. We could create simple electrical systems. And that level of technology in our understanding of science allowed us to advance to the next level. And that allowed us to advance to the next level. So every area of science we discover, we learn things that allows us to understand the next level of science. Simple mechanics, electromagnetism with people like Tesla, then nuclear physics, then ultimately high energy physics, and eventually something even more. And even our fuels. We have wood that's right there, which allowed us to get going. But then as we advanced, if we just used woods, we would burn down our forests. But then we had coal and gasoline waiting for us, and then uranium. And it's interesting enough, I just happened to talk to an MIT student in a lecture who's working on fusion. So he's working on a technology where we can just take deuterium from the ocean or other materials and create what would essentially be free, unlimited energy. And that's what allowed us to go from the Stone Age to the Space Age. Everything was designed so that we could step by step by step and explore our world. And the last topic is biomedics. And this is how humans are looking to life to advance our technology. And I gave a lecture about 2 years ago. It was called The Surprising Relevance of Engineering and Biology. And I encourage you to listen to it, because that's kind of like part 1, and this is kind of like part 2. So this will be, self-sustained, you'll understand it, but this will give you more background information, which I don't have time to cover. But what's important to realize is if you look at the Darwinian framework, the evolutionary framework, one of the most important contributions it's made to science is to slow its progress. One of the most important contributions it's made to our technology is to slow progress. Because what happened is people assumed, based on his ideas and materials philosophies, that life was just an accident. It's probably pretty poorly designed, it's kind of clumsy, we could do better. So hey, we're so smart, let's just do a new agricultural system with lots of fertilizers and pesticides, because hey, I'm sure that soil must be really simple, you've got all these organisms in competition to each other, we'll just help out the good ones, right? But what they failed to realize is they disrupted the communication network, and now our soil is becoming more infertile. But fortunately, there's people looking at agriculture from a design perspective that could help save the agricultural ecosystem when they throw off the shackles of the materialist philosophy. But again, just as a famous quote, it says, "It was Darwin's greatest accomplishment to show that directive organization of living beings can be explained as a result of a natural process, natural selection, without any need to resort to a creator or other external agent." And what's remarkable is how much that slowed us technologically. Because what would have happened if at the Industrial Revolution we said, because life is so brilliantly designed, let's copy it. Let's create technologies that don't produce lots of waste. Let's use the energy of the sun. Let's use the efficiencies of life. How much more advanced would we be than if we just thought we were so smart, much smarter than nature, we'll just do it all by ourselves? Well, again, let me use a wonderful example, and that's the design of the human body. There was an article or a book came out by Nathan Lentz called Human Errors. He was just talking about how badly the human body is designed. And what I appreciate so much about his book, it was so consistent with his atheistic philosophy and so spectacularly false in terms of the science. So here's one example. Nathan Lentz claimed that the ankle was badly designed, there was useless bones, but Stuart Burgess, he is a scholar in our network. He's one of the top engineers in the United Kingdom, and he looked at the bone-ankle complex and found that it is ideally designed for everything that humans have to do. We have to walk, we have to squat, we have to stand, we have to walk on even surfaces. And when you look at everything humans have to do, the human design of the foot and ankle are optimally designed for every purpose that it has. So what he's done is he's copied the design of the human ankle and foot and has copied it on things like robots and prosthetics. So again, he's using the brilliance of nature to advance technologically. Vision, I mentioned vision before. And if you look at the logic of the eye, it's essentially like that of a digital camera. And when you look at the retina, it has incredibly sophisticated neural networks that pre-process images in amazing ways. So if you throw a baseball, the problem is the time it takes from the signal of your eye to reach your brain, that ball could go like, a couple feet. That would be bad. But your retina actually pre-processes the image, so it anticipates where the ball will be and sends that image to your brain. If you look at the human mind, and this is a beautiful example too. What happens is people would say, the photoreceptors face backwards. What a terrible design. And that reflects the fact they weren't trained as engineers. Because as it turns out, there's cells that act like fiber optic cables that take the light directly to the photoreceptors, and they use quantum confinement. So what you find in life is the advanced application of quantum technology. And people are looking at things like birds that can process the polarization of light. And by looking to life, we can advance in the quantum technological and nanotechnology field. And of course, if you look at the brain, it uses incredibly sophisticated neural processing, where it takes a digital image and reconstructs it and extracts the information you need and removes the information you don't need, and extraordinary efficiency. A friend of mine is a professor, one of the top universities in Asia. He does machine vision, and he said that there's so much the eye can do that we're not even close to replicating. But again, if we look to the design, we can improve our machine vision. And of course, I talked about mycelial networks. What's really amazing is people are looking to the design logic of these mycelial networks, these fungal internets, to look at how to have the most efficient networks with various trade-offs, because you have to trade off with material production costs, with efficiency, with transport efficiency, with reach. And the mycelial networks show optimization principles that we're learning from for our internet. At least we're starting to look in that direction. And here's a beautiful paper I literally just found while listening to the last lecture, called Finding Wisdom for Business Networks in the Wood Wide Web. I'm going to read a quote from it. It says, according to Science Daily, mycelium serve as a smart agents that facilitate sophisticated buy-sell trades between plants growing under conditions of high resource availability and plants located in less favorable conditions. Just as business brokers and those in the transportation sector charge a fee for their services of identifying needs and transporting them, the mycorrhizal network retains part of the nutrients it transfers. This creates a mutual beneficial relationship, allowing all connected parties to thrive. Similar models are used throughout the business world, such as merchant charging fees for the convenience of using credit cards. So the mycelium network gives a service, it transports signals and perhaps materials. It takes a fee, it takes its nutrients to rebuild itself, and we're looking to the efficiency and optimization of that transaction to improve us economically. So in summary, what you find is that the evidence of design is not only pervasive, but it's interrelated in a symphonic harmony that was designed specifically to allow us to advance technologically in order to give honor and glory to our Creator. Thank you.